In this video, I'm going to touch on how to go about creating, duplicating, merging, flattening, and deleting layers in order to get you started using layers in your editing workflow. Now, to start out with, you'll notice that there are two layers menus that you can utilize to actually do a lot of the functions that I've just mentioned. You'll notice up in the top left hand corner here we have on the main navigational menu you have layer. Now that contains the majority of the different options that you can utilize with layers. You also have a similar menu that duplicates some of these menu items actually in the top right hand corner of the layers panel, as you can see here. So it has some very similar things like new layer, duplicate layer, etc. Now, along with those two menus, you also have some shortcut items that are actually at the bottom of the layers panel. So to start out with, let's actually create a new layer. So if I go to layers up the top here and we go new layer, what you'll notice is you have a new layer window. Now this essentially allows you to rename your layer, choose whether you want it to be a clipping mask based on the previous layer, and we'll actually look at clipping masks in a future video. You can also label your particular layer by actually giving it a color. So in this example, I'm going to select red. And you also have some blending mode options and opacity settings that we're also going to take a look at in a future video. So I'm going to click OK, and what you'll notice is that we now have a transparent layer that's labeled with red. So that's one way of going about and actually creating a transparent layer. Now, transparent layers themselves can be utilized for a range of different things, such as cloning aspects of an original image to the transparent layer, and also drawing on the transparent layer in order to create certain effects. So it does have some interesting uses, although I must say I don't use it that often. Now, along with actually creating new layers, the main set of layer types that you're actually going to be utilizing are new adjustment layers. So if we go to layer and we go to new adjustment layer, these are the main types of layers that you're going to be utilizing throughout your editing workflow. Things like levels, curves, hue and saturation, color balance. All these aspects will actually adjust the density, brightness, contrast, saturation, and color correction of your images, and even create black and white photographs for you. You can do through new adjustment layers, and that's predominantly what you're going to be using with regards to layers. And by using new adjustment layers, you're actually editing non-destructively, as opposed to actually applying a adjustment to the background layer itself. So in this example, if I was to go up to image and go and add a levels adjustment that we've just done here that I actually haven't applied yet, so I'll just bring up this menu and I actually apply this setting to this particular image, you'll notice now that's applied to the background layer. But you don't want that, because then you can't actually go back through all the adjustments that you've made in order to make sure you haven't made an error, or in some cases you may edit the file too much and you may end up with extreme noise or posterization or things in the image that just start to look unsightly. So by using new adjustment layers, you actually avoid editing the background layer at all. So I'm going to undo that by pressing Command Z on my actual Mac, as you can see there. But now what I can do is actually select the levels layer, and I can apply those same adjustments to the levels layer. I'm going to hold down Alt on a PC or Option on the Mac, and I'm just going to show the actual clipping in the highlights here that are showing up in blue. And I'm just going to go to about there, and now I've got a levels adjustment layer with some settings on it, as you can see by previewing it. So any layers that actually sit underneath that particular levels adjustment will have those corrections made to it. Now if a layer sat above the levels layer, then those corrections would not be applied to it. So that's just something to take note of. Now, along with actually creating new layers, we can duplicate existing background layers, for example. So if we go select the background layer, we can then go to the layer menu and actually go duplicate layer. Now you'll see here that we have a duplicate layer window. Now this gives you the option to rename the duplicated layer, and it also gives you the option of choosing a destination. So for example, at the moment it's selected as the same document that I'm currently working on, but if you wanted to, you could actually select new document and give a new document name, and it actually create a new file with that background layer that we've duplicated. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it set to the file that we're currently working on, and I'm going to click OK. So what you'll notice now is we have an exact duplicate of the background layer. Now, why would you want to duplicate the background layer, for example? Well, if you're doing any photo retouching or restoration, you really want to make sure that you duplicate the background layer, primarily because once you start retouching and restoring the image, if you make errors or you stuff up somewhere along the line, it's great to be able to go back to the original file and actually compare it and see where you've gone wrong, and to be able to copy those original areas to replace the areas that you've actually made mistakes on. So from that perspective, it's really good for your editing workflow, and it really saves getting angry about actually losing that information by flattening it and saving it, or having saved your file after making all those changes but realizing that you've actually made a mistake and not being able to go back. Whereas having duplicate layers allows you to retain that original information. Now, you can also use smart objects to do a similar type of job, but we're going to look at those with regards to smart objects in future videos. Now, along with actually duplicating your background layers, or any layers for that matter, including adjustment layers, you can actually merge layers. So for example, if I had made some adjustments to this particular transparent layer, and in this example, just for the sake of it, I'm just going to add some brush strokes just to make it really obvious that I've actually done something. So I'm just going to draw across the image. What you can do is you can actually merge this layer with this background layer. So if I select both of these layers and then we go to File and go to Merge Layers, it'll actually merge those layers into one layer. Now, the problem with doing this is, of course, not being able to go back and re-edit those individual layers, which is a problem if that's something that you want to do. But if you had multiple layers that made up one image and there were different sections of an image, this is something you might like to do in order to bring all those layers together to create that background layer, especially if you didn't have the background to begin with and you're creating sort of a photo montage, for example. Now, along with that, you can actually also use Merge Visible. Now, Merge Visible actually allows you to merge layers according to their visibility settings. So for example, here all the layers currently are visible and they currently have their visibility icon turned on. But if I was to turn off, say for example, the levels layer, you'll notice now I can actually go to Layers and go Merge Visible, and it'll only merge the layers that are actually visible. So I'm just going to undo that. Now, also with merging your images, you can also flatten them. And by flatten, I mean it'll actually take all the layers that are currently in your layers panel and flatten them into one background layer. And once again, this is something that you necessarily don't want to do through the editing workflow, because primarily if you ever want to go back and actually change anything, you won't be able to, because especially if you've saved the image, you won't be able to go back and actually change anything, or any of the adjustment layers that you've added, because they essentially become one background layer. So if I go to Layer and we go to Flatten Image, you'll notice now that I have one background layer that has all of the adjustments that I made, the levels adjustments, the little brush adjustment here, and the main background layer combined into one layer. Now, why would you actually want to flatten your image? Well, the primary reason to flattening your image is you'll have a master file that will contain all of your layer adjustments, and you'll save that and archive that separately, right? But you then actually create a flattened version of that file, and that would be your print file, your output file, the one that you actually send to the photographic printers. And the reason you do this is because certain photographic printers can't actually print multiple layer files. So you really want to make sure that you have completely flattened layers, no additional channels or no additional paths, which we'll also take a look at, and things like that in order to actually get the files printed. Now, having said that, there are some exceptions, such as if you were printing directly from Photoshop to, say, an Epson inkjet printer, Photoshop would actually recognize those layers and wouldn't have any trouble actually printing that particular photograph. But with regards to, photographic labs that have these big Durst and Chimera printers, they have different input software, and you need to make sure that the files are correctly set up in order for them to actually open them, to accept them, to be able to actually get them printed. So that's one reason why you actually want to flatten your files. And also, flattening your files automatically happens if you save them as a JPEG and you want to send JPEGs to people. They end up getting flattened from that perspective as well. So now that we've actually flattened this entire image, what I actually want to do is show you how to delete layers. So I'm going to undo this, and I actually want to delete layer 1. So what you can do is either right click on that particular layer and go delete layer, or you can go up to the main navigational menu and actually go delete layer. Or finally, the quickest option that I usually use is actually to grab that layer, drag it down to the little trash icon down the bottom here and let go of it. And that automatically deletes that particular layer. So that's sort of a brief overview of how to go about creating layers, duplicating them, merging and flattening layers, and also deleting layers. In the next video, we're going to take a look at how to go about organizing layers and grouping them so you actually understand which layers actually apply to what elements in your photographs.